Demographics is destiny. I was recently in London, and as John Cleese has remarked, it's no longer an English or in fact British city. It's like every other cosmopolitan city, New York, Toronto, Paris. All are post-Western cities, and all, now other than their facades, are virtually indistinguishable from one another. That which made them American, French, Canadian, and indeed British has all been washed away, and all that has been left behind are globalized cities with the same globalized chains of food shops and globalized consumer products. The groups living within these cities have nothing in common, and whose only sense of community is, as oft repeated, raising per capita GDP. There are those, however, that do prefer the transformation that has taken place over the past few decades, but others do not. What is most critical, however, at least in terms of this video's focus, is that for the UK as a whole, the window in which voting for any other future is quickly closing, and the time is soon arriving when the native British people will be unable to exercise self-determination in the only home they will ever have through democratic means within just a couple of election cycles. That is, the peoples of England and the UK as a whole will no longer demographically be able to democratically change course from the one currently set to radically transform the nation forever. And we know this because a senior conservative strategist accidentally admitted that the UK, because of demographic changes, is devolving into a one-party state.
We must be mad, literally mad as a nation, to be permitting the annual inflow of some 50,000 dependents who are for the most part the material of the future growth of the immigrant descended population. It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pyre.
It is quite appropriate that the 50th anniversary of Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech was just this past week. The transformation that has occurred in Birmingham, for example, the city where the speech was given, has been nothing short of spectacular and has exceeded even the wildest expectations of Powell and his contemporaries. While of course there are those that revel in the addition of kebab and curry to the local takeaway establishments, there are those that have a profound unease and sense of foreboding with the idea of being made a minority in their own country. Accompanying the demographic transformation of the country has also seen massive changes in not only the society as a whole, but with the ever increasingly draconian laws and their implementation in order to facilitate what the political class calls community cohesion. The UK's capital now has more murders in real terms than New York City for the first time in modern history, but devotes its resources to prosecute native citizens that make posts critical of the increasing enrichment of their city on social media. Restrictions on thought, opinion, expression, association, and speech are being ruthlessly enforced regardless of context. The recent debacle of Count Dankula, a YouTuber from Scotland who was dragged through the courts for essentially making an oft-colored joke, is just symptomatic of a broken and divided society, as one where social media is patrolled by the nation's police forces to make sure that nobody, and by nobody, I mean certain classes of people, is ever offended by anything. And the transformation is real. Cities are becoming ever more segregated, and in London alone, between the last two censuses, a full 600,000 white Britons have left the capital. Like the US, Canada, France, and many other Western countries, the UK is now experiencing full-on white flight for whatever reason. In fact, the BBC is saying that it is a story of success. Either way, city demographics, like the nation's, is changing, and because of recent and inadvertent admissions by a member of the Tory party, these changes will become permanent and irreversible. Without realizing it, and only thinking of the damage that demographic transformation would have for his party, a Tory apparatchik explained very clearly why very soon the native peoples of Great Britain will soon lose their ability for self-determination via the ballot box. Forever. A senior Conservative strategist sounded the alarm over the party's declining popularity with non-white voters. Lord Cooper of Windrush said that the Tories would find it almost impossible to win in an area with a non-white population above 30%, adding, by the time of the next general election, that there would be more than 120 seats where this was the case. He went on that unless something changes before long, there just won't be enough white voters in the electorate for the Conservative Party to be able to win. And that unless the party significantly increases its support among non-white voters, the pace at which the country is becoming more ethnically diverse will overtake it. To translate this, when an area falls below 70% white in population, the Tories will not be able to win a contested election against leftist whites allied with voting blocs made up by some non-native groups. Hindus, for example, vote in fairly large numbers for the Conservatives. To extrapolate, the Tories are the only mainstream party in the UK that is centre-right that has any hope of forming a government. If they cannot win elections, no party that is centre-right can win. What this means is that the single most important component to any election now is identity politics. And because for the most part, whites fail to create large monolithic blocks when it comes time to vote, put simply, this is a formula for a one-party state ensconced in ever more socialism. The UK itself is also particularly vulnerable as it is a unitary state with no written constitution and a government that has shown itself all too ready to abuse the rights of its citizens. Draconian laws on speech, opinion, freedom of action and association, and a plethora of others have been passed in order to keep a lid on the problem that has been imported and self-inflicted upon the country by its political class, and that it shows the populace daily that there are no guarantees and no protections on their freedoms or their rights. The same situation can be seen in the US as minority voters overwhelmingly embrace the Democratic Party, the US version of the Labour Party, a party of big government and ever more state largesse. These changes in demographics on both sides of the Atlantic saw their genesis in the post-war era, and when statisticians projected the demographic transformation of those nations, they were called fearmongers, or they were trading in conspiracy theories, or simply obtuse. When, in the case of the US, it became apparent that the conspiracy theorists were right, the response changed from being called a conspiracy theorist to one of indignation. And that, yes, right, the statistical projections were true, but the new refrain went that if you had any problem becoming a minority in your own country, then you were not only evil, but a racist. Oxford professor and population expert David Coleman, like many in the United States before him, says that white Britons could be a minority in the only home they will ever have by the 2060s or sooner. Of course, there are those that dispute his statistical analysis, but that's not the point. The point is that what the so-called far right has been warning about for decades, the Tory party has just inadvertently and openly admitted, and that the British people will lose their self-determination as English, Scottish, Irish, and Welsh people long before they drop below 50% of the overall population. And this is something to either celebrate or recoil in horror about. I guess it just depends who you are. And when looking at the political culture, the vast majority of people in the UK, no matter their ancestry, do not seem too troubled by the emergence of a one-party socialist state. From the news media on down, there is a constant shrill cry for, "Please, sir, can I have some more nanny state?" And that same media helps build the consensus that fosters a mental attitude where the vast majority refuse to see the danger of a one-party state built on identity politics and openly mock, deride, and threaten the livelihood of all of those who warn against it. Tick tock, which way, British man? Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of material, please consider subscribing. Also follow Black Pigeon on the usual social media. Till next time.